You guys, I personally appreciate the job that you do. Sometimes it's Garen trying to find me in my office, or I know there's a lot of questions sometimes that you don't want to ask that you have to ask. You don't have to ask them. But I've done this, as you guys know, for a long time, and a lot of different levels and a lot of different places, and you do develop an appreciation for people that we work together. Is really what it comes down to. So, outside of Garen and Steiny, okay. So fire away. But let me say this. I think at the outset of the year, for myself and my staff, is we were defining success for the upcoming season. This was my second full year, which is still, it's not your first year, but it's still relatively new, and with a lot of change. As you know, our roster looked very different at the end of this year than it did in the summer, and the things that I was really and our staff was really focused on was one, the development. We've heard about that, and that's development is an investment, and when you make an investment, it pays dividends over time. And some of that development, you see the returns on it, quickly. Just like any index, there's going to be ups and downs, but that was a real priority. And seeing, let's just take Onyeka most recently, because I don't think maybe people saw him in the same light that they did, say, Zach or Dyson, because he'd been here. But that's been going on, and so you appreciate that because the work that goes into that. And the second thing was to continue to really formulate an identity, and part of that identity is the development, but it's wanting to be a work program where we take pride in putting in work, because again, I think those are the foundational things that over time help you succeed. A group of players that functions at a high level, that functions collectively more than they do individually, they have to have a level of unselfishness, and those sacrifices were something. So that identity is something that you try to demonstrate, and when you play that way, it's usually a good barometer of kind of where you are. Playing takes sacrifice, it takes hard work, and that was another thing. A third thing was a style of play, and we talk a lot about an offensive style of play, but I think when you watch particularly the second half last night, you had a group of people that were defending collectively, and I think that's probably as important as anything. When you set out tactically what you want to do, there's always some changes, but to have a group that has a style of play on both sides of the ball, whether that be offensively playing with pace, which I think fits our team, playing with the pass, having multiple actions. We have guys that are capable of generating good offense collectively, I think more effectively than we have, isolation situations, and we wanted to try to capitalize, on that. And, and then obviously the winning is always important, but to have a chance to win a certain way. And, I don't know, all the expectations are always there. The fact that we were able to win on the level that we did, winning 40 games, with some of the adversity, the injuries, whatever, you have. But the first three things, I think, those are the things that over time, those are the things that build a program. And obviously last night was a hard one, because I think the way that we played, I saw all those things kind of come together, and you want your team to be rewarded for that in an external way, and that wasn't the case. But I think that foundation, although sometimes it's less visible, is moving that direction. And just like our players and their growth, with some of these young guys in particular, I think I talked about a long runway. And they have that, and that doesn't mean that you don't want quick progress. But I think there's a realism involved, and we're seeing those things happen on a real level. And for me, that success in different forms, for those of you that have watched this play all year and we've talked about us all year, I think that probably makes a lot of sense to you.
Coach, when you named quite a few things already, but what are you kind of tasking these guys with as they move into the off season so that you can build on some of those things that you mentioned?
Well, that's the key word, is build. And whether it's continuing to develop and players becoming better over the course of a summer and through another year like they did this year, that identity, the work that you have to put in. I think everybody's got to work. Every work looks different for everybody over the course of the summer. Some guys need more of a break. Some guys are ready to get at it. Guys are, as much as they love Atlanta, there's something healthy about stepping away. So that challenge, I think they're aware of individually, and that also, I think that one of the unique things, as you're building a program, is the relationships that drive those things. And you just look over there and you see the connection between our coaching staff and our players. I think that's a big part of the summer. Some of it's knowing when to give guys space, and then also to be available for them. And this is the best coaching staff that I've ever had, in 20 years. And I think that those relationships and the teaching that's involved in that thing, particularly with young players. I walked in and Epe Udo was meeting with Mo in his office. That's not a scheduled meeting. And I think that says a lot. Those things are organic. So some of the other things relate more to team. But those less objective things that take place during the course of the summer have the ability to kind of continue to bring a group together, particularly if they're like-minded. And I think that's what we're driving towards, is a group of players and a coaching staff that sees this endeavor, this game, this competition in the same way. And usually, even unfortunately, a game like last night, I know there's guys in our team that will take that and they'll use it and they'll think about it because they care. And we've got players that care, and they care about each other, and we have to continue to water the plants.
Coach, you mentioned the coaching staff and helping the players, and I asked Dyson about how it's helped him, and he said you included, of course, have instilled like this confidence in him, and that you saw potential in him that a lot of people didn't see. Just what have you seen out of his season? Did you foresee him maybe having this type of season that he had?
This isn't like an I told you so thing, but with Dyson, even watching him, you kind of, there's some players you get an instinct on. And he's one of them. It's easy to, the work that he puts in, when you feel like someone believes in you and you're allowed to fail, that's generally a great formula to succeed. And when someone like Dyson cares as much as they do, sometimes that care factor can even get in your way because you want to do everything right all the time. And usually when you put the time in and you work like that, the people that are around you want to continue to encourage you, to not be hesitant, to do the things you're working on. And his mental toughness and his maturity, I think, has been a big part of, him getting better. And the other thing, to be honest with you, that I think is really important and sometimes lost is you got to enjoy it. and he's so stoic that sometimes you can't see that readily, but if you're around him more, there's a little sarcasm here and there, and a sense of humor that he doesn't always let everybody in on. But I'm lucky, there's some guys on our team that are really fun to coach, and it's because of that, and it's easy to believe in him. And, he's certainly one of those guys.
Coach, I know that you mentioned build, and with the exception of obviously getting healthy for some of the key contributors and so forth.
Yeah.
What is the next step for this team? Is there such thing as something that maybe we didn't see this year that you can feel good saying next year you will see more of this?
I don't think it's like binary. What I mean by that is this year and next year, I think it's more time, and that's why I would kind of refer to the runway. I think we will see things. There'll be things we'll look at over the course of the summer that we want to do better or do differently. But I think fundamentally, we've begun to put a foundation down. The guys that maybe haven't been able to play for various reasons, whether there's someone that's playing in front of them. You can't play everybody. We ran into that a little bit this year, even with the injuries. It was some of that was simpler when it was obvious that here's Jalen, this is his role. But I think a lot of that has to do with how guys grow, and how they grow into the things that we're wanting them to do now. And that kind of partnership in their development is really, really important. That the things that that we feel like we need to be successful are the same things that players understand, and that doesn't inhibit them from doing other things as well. And that's where I think you see even more growth come. I think you'll see Zachary attacking in transition more. I think you'll see Dyson shooting the ball even quicker, without any indecision. I think you'll see, JJ using his versatility in ways that are really unique as he discovers that more about himself. We got a lot of players that are still discovering who they are, and as that happens, the other thing that occurs is you begin to discover more things, as they become, it's so hard. I always try to think back. I was in college, and I remind you guys that the average age of our group is 22 years old, and I do it really as much for myself too, to have a level of patience and to set high standards, but also understand that is what we're working towards. So I think that continued progress, as much as anything, it's dramatically different. All of that changes on some level relative to, your roster. That's what happens with injuries. Your roster changes. That's what happens with a trade. Your roster changes. So there's always that recalibration, but I think the biggest things are going to be an extension of what we're seeing right now.
And then as a guard yourself, you talked about...
You remember that, huh?
Of course I do.
Just because I'm not as tall as you.
I know a little bit. I've been
All right,
watching
there you
for a while. You mentioned things about, players growing and all growing at different paces and so forth. What is the next step for Trae Young?
I think you've begun to see those next steps. I think it's a perfect example of, how much we value Trae and, what he does on the floor and, the way he makes other people better. And I think him continuing to make other people better, to make his teammates better. And I thought there were very visible signs of that over the course of the year. I thought he was a big help. There's a lot of situations, but you saw how he interacted with Zach, and I think Trae's focus, as we've talked about this year, and again, it's not like season's over and, like all of a sudden there's any one thing. It's just, I think his drive and, the importance of efficiency you know, with what he does. And again, that's a lot of different things. And I know he sees it that way. I know that's important to him. And, you know, Trey's someone that's fun to coach because there are opportunities. Sometimes we think a player that's had success that he's had, there's lots of ways he can get better, you know, and I think that's part of this year for him, was continuing to try to embrace those things and to grow. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, it's easy to have younger guys. We see the idea of obviously that you grow, but you know, it's like for all of us, that's a lifelong process. I think it becomes harder as you get older, you know, particularly as you have success or you settle into certain things, and as the team changes around you, you have to adapt. And Trey's shown a willingness to do all those things, and as I said, is someone that we really value and that I value personally.
How do you you talk about like building and keep building, but how do you kind of maintain like the patience, especially from some of the older guys that want to win and want to make the playoffs without building like a frustration from it?
Well, it's interesting that those things are directly correlated to expectations on one level. You know, patience might not even be the right word. You know, I think you can have patience and urgency at the same thing. There's a realism involved, I think, with patience. You know, you may be patient for a while about something, and then you begin to grow impatient. You know, and you know, those standards and those demands, sometimes we all need, you know, to push us to another level. So I've seen a team this year that, again, relative to expectations, I don't have a chip on my shoulder about any of it, but I hope people appreciate what this group of men have been able to accomplish, given the way the season evolved. And you have to look a little deeper, and, you know, make the playoffs, not make the playoffs. Ultimately, that we're judged on that. But there's a lot of good teams that put a lot of effort in, and, you know, last night's a great example. You're this far away from having a chance to continue to play, and that hurts. I think when you feel how badly, you know, a group of men want to succeed, it's less about being patient with them as giving them a pathway, you know, and then continuing to push them along that pathway, and that's what we'll keep trying to do.
For someone like Terrence, and I don't mean to pick on Terrence, but like
Don't then.
George has played with you before, and Karras is a free agent, so like particular to him, like what are the challenges of joining a team mid-season when you don't practice as much, and what might change for him with an off season and a training camp?
Yeah, I think the first thing I think right now is a difficult time to kind of try to look forward and, you know, project things for any of our players. You know, I think that if anything, you're stepping back and trying to kind of absorb everything that's just happened. What I saw last night was like an unbelievable competitor who didn't play as much in the Orlando game because of situational things. And you know, he's another guy you just really appreciate the things that he does and what he brings to the team. Another guy that's fun to coach. It kind of seems consistent, doesn't it?
What is your feeling about the last two games of Zach? It was a little
I knew we were going to Zach. Go ahead.
It was a little bit tough for him, but at the end of the day, I think it's a growing experience.
It's yes, you know, in a way, I would have loved to see Zach go 11 for 11. The fact that he took 11 shots in a game of that magnitude says a lot about who he is and his desire to be good. And that the experience, I wish it would have been, you know, another 7-game series. But that experience for a lot of those guys being in that game, a game of that on that level, there's always more. You're always wanting more. But I think we have a number of guys that are going to be able to reflect on that, and more than reflect, internalize it. My guess is that's already happened, and that's where, you know, I think summer becomes a real opportunity. And you know, you never want to. How many games this year that we're talking about Zach in a snapshot of time, and then all of a sudden he goes for 38 points, and the guys are giving me a hard time because I pulled him out and he didn't get 40. I guess I should have been more aware of that. I think Zach's going to have another chance to get 40, and that's where that's part of it. That's part of the growth, and that's where there is that combination of like patience and also an urgency. You know, Zach's not. He doesn't feel patient right now. You know, that's great. You know, he feels urgent, he feels competitive and committed and passionate, and that's why he's in that game.
And do you think playing the EuroBasket with the French national team can also help him in his progression?
I think any situation that provides you the opportunity for high-level competition, you're able to take things from that. You know, even if it's being on a team. You know, you see lots of players that, you know, I remember we played in the playoffs against Dallas, and Jalen Brunson was a good player, but what he did to us in the playoffs was like, whoa. And, you know, the time that I don't know how long he was there, but he was clearly getting better. He was ready to play, and all of a sudden, you have a new set of opportunities, and you see all this work just kind of take off. I use him as example because that you know, I viscerally feel that one sometimes when I see him, and have so much respect for him. But the point is, those opportunities, you never know when they're going to come, and sometimes they come immediately for guys. But that's an example of an opportunity that Zach's going to have.
Coach, from the beginning of the year, all the way from game one, all the way up until this point, how do you assess how this team met your personal expectations that you have for this team?
They, over and over again, you know, either met them or exceeded them. And that's not to say that there were plenty of times they didn't meet them. And that sometimes, you know, our job, my job as a leader of this team, as the head coach, is to maintain standards, and when they're met in whatever way, you know, we have to live with some of the results. You know, when they're not met, we have to attack those things, and we have to continue just to be relentless in what we ask for them to do. And sometimes that process is one of understanding, you know, as much as anything. It's understanding why did that not happen, and having your players understand. And I think when you know why, you buy in more, and you're better able to execute. And that over the course of the season, that's a lot of what we went through. And one of my expectation for their resilience, you want that. You want that perseverance, and we were able to find that in a lot of ways. And guys were able to find that individually. I mean, look at someone like V, who, you know, towards the end of last year, he was a two-way, you know, and the way that he got better. And then at the beginning of the year, he gets hurt. And then he comes back, and he's trying to find his way. And then all of a sudden, over the last X games, he's like making shots. He made those shots in practice all the time and worked at it. And then we have a trade that happens, and all of a sudden his opportunities are more limited. And the ability to kind of take all of that and process it, especially for a young guy that's, you know, gaining confidence and things like that, that's an expectation that I have. You know, like, that's, even if it's 5 minutes, come in and give us everything you got for 5 minutes. You can have that and also understand that there's challenges with that. So I think both those things can be true at the same time. My point being them meeting expectations, exceeding them, also failing to meet them. I mean, it's it's just a process, and those expectations change over the course of the season, you know, and they're not always reflected in a win or a loss. Sometimes they are, you know, and that's usually a good barometer. But I don't know if that answers the question as well as it's a hard question.
Was this one of the more, I mean, you've been coaching for a long time, but
Yeah.
one of the more challenging years for you? You have a young team, you're dealing with roster changes and trades.
Yes.
And things like
Yes, it was. It was. And sometimes, you know, being challenged can also be rewarding. And, you know, how we approach that, how we deal with that, you know, I just try to keep focused on a bigger picture and see, you know, individually and collectively what I think it was challenging for our players. That's why, you know, some of the resilience and the persistence, and, you know, I think there's three words to me that, you know, and you mentioned one earlier, patience. But again, I tried to qualify that with urgency as well. But I think patience comes in from the standpoint that you have to be willing to live with some mistakes if guys are growing, and they're kind of the mistakes that we all have to make in order to improve. And the other one is just persistence, just to be relentless in everything that we're doing and continue to grind and to work. And then you have to persevere through some of the challenges. And those are the things, if we can continue to instill in our group, I think we'll keep getting better.
Coach, we ask these players what's next for them so much, but what's next for Quin Snyder?
I'll finish this.
What's the summer?
You haven't gotten the message about me talking about my summer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't have a Netflix show I like to watch. You're not going to know what my favorite food is.
Yeah.
Right? Bob might tell you, but he doesn't know either. You know, in keeping with, you know, what we're talking about, for me to be able to step back for a minute and spend some time with my family, you know, achieve a little balance, you always have a better perspective when you do that.
Thanks, man.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks,